Welcome to ARDA and the effort for conscious, creative, integrative, and individualized health. My name is Cory Edmund Endrulat. You may have not heard of my work before. You may be curious, why is this about health? And how is that relevant to me? Well, unfortunately in our world, a lot of us have to deal with our health on a day-to-day basis. Some of us, we ignore it. Later on, we find out we have to pay attention to it. And I want to approach this wherever you are in regards to the topic of health. I believe this will be really essential for you to watch. And I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm being very honest with this approach. I think it's very unique. I think it will benefit the average person from any country in the world, although many people may think of America when it comes to obesity and heart disease and heart attacks and strokes and all this stuff. Well, it's happening worldwide where people are afraid of what's happening to their health, or afraid of taking certain drugs, afraid of having certain diseases. Maybe it runs in their family. And this is a big subject that we have to navigate. So I'm going to help you navigate it literally through the course of a journey, because you might be wondering where the word ARDA comes from. And if you're familiar with my work, I have a seminar called The Lord of the Rings Dethroned, or The Lord of the Rings Unthroned, where I talk about the symbology behind the Lord of the Rings franchise, or book series, if you will, by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, this book series, this franchise, is very popular around the world, and you may say, well, what does that have to do with health? Well, I just said that health is actually a journey, something that takes time. You have to navigate through it. And so if we really take it as such, then it's not necessarily a diet, a to-do list, a checklist, right? Like, oh, I got to pay attention to my health. Oh, I got to take this supplement. I got to take this medication. Oh, I got to listen to the doctor. Or, oh, I got to do my own research because I don't trust any of the doctors. Well, maybe this is us trying to navigate our path in this grand journey where we have to bring other people along with us, and we have to explore new terrains, and there's going to be all sorts of enemies that we have to approach. Well, that is what ARDA is, my friends. And if you look at all my different works, maybe you have not been familiar. And I'm just going right through this seminar. I'm just going to be right to the point and give you very practical tips. You have my work on slavery, on permaculture, which is a form of gardening, abolitionism from America, looking at the history of that, Taoism from ancient China. So a lot of different topics. Cult World is a documentary I worked on in relation to cults and behavior that is controlling or restrictive, manipulative. Obviously, that delves into psychology, which is related to health, and a lot of problems in our world might be psychosomatic, not even physical. So we'll talk about that too, of course. That also relates to the Health Revealed project on healthrevealed.org. I'm also creating a 5-acre permaculture community center here in Newport Richey, Florida. That's at bigfootflorida.com. I have a whole book series on my own philosophy called Natureosophy, where I talk about the appeal to nature in philosophy. I've hosted several summits with over 50 plus speakers. The Liberty to showcase even more speakers than that. And then Nita.1 is a website I run called Nature is the Answer. So one common trend among all my works is that nature is important, or we have to listen to what's already here. Maybe we have such a thing as an immune system or a blueprint to heal within our body. And we may say that also exists for the world, as we're trying to find out what are these systems that we live in, how do they affect our health. So many people are watching the news, they're consuming certain information, not just food, and that information is going to determine not just the food they consume, but everything they do in their life. It could be everything from posture, the way I'm sitting, the way I'm talking, the way I'm breathing, that can affect individuals' health. And there's so many different researchers out there, so much coming out right now, so many trends, right? Methylene blue and BCP 157 and, red light therapy and cold plunging, all these different things that people are jumping onto. Is this really going to be what benefits your health? And let's not forget about morality either. Let's not forget about how we feel about the food that we consume. If you look here in the center of this slide on the bottom, you'll see I have an area called The Start, and that points to the ARDA diet. My first book actually was the ARDA diet, but I never had a work really dedicated to display what the ARDA diet is. So I don't want you to actually buy my book. I really don't. In fact, I find it very complicated because it's my first book. It's a little rough around the edges, and I was starting to write it when I was 18, getting into health coaching. It's very detailed and very unique. I believe that this seminar will be for anybody who's interested in what is this work, and you don't have to buy the book if you just watch the seminar. So let's get started, shall we? I'm not here to sell you anything, just want to give you a quick reminder. You don't have to buy the book, watch the seminar instead, because here's the deal. When we're talking about igniting or awakening mankind, because I'm doing this seminar for Truth or Freedom Under Natural Law, the conference, and the conference is called Ignite Hearts and Minds. If we're going to ignite any change in our world, health is a very big priority. For a lot of people, they say, man, once I start eating cleaner, once I start eating better, this changed for me, and then their minds start to be open to new ideas. I talk a lot about philosophy and history, and not everybody's into that, but once they look down nutrition and health and realize, wow, I can heal myself, or wow, I don't need a doctor's permission to be healthy, I don't need to be on all these different medications, that can cause quite a bit of a shift in people. And, I'm not lying. I mean, here's a bunch of studies talking about how we can ignite awakening through health. And just by taking certain steps in our lives, they don't even have to be huge steps in our lives, we see that people start to think better, clearer, they're able to talk better, right? We talk about dementia or Alzheimer's, and you can see there's a bunch of different studies on the screen. I'm going to be sharing studies through the whole course of this seminar, so I'm not just BSing to you, and you can do your own research, of course, as well. But if we're going to talk about health, right, the word health comes from whole in Old English or Latin, and it also can mean status, right? Like if you're thinking about a video game, or if we're talking about Lord of the Rings, right? You have this status. That's your health bar, your HP bar, they would say in gaming, right? But then we have awakening. And awakening is when we're starting to see the whole. We're starting to understand what health is. It means to bring into being, arise, originate, to revive in the sense of gaming, right? To awaken, to realize oneself, recognition, recognition. And from that, we can recognize what is truly healthy, right? By understanding health, we become healthy. We are becoming whole. We are safe. We're unhurt. We have full HP, right? We have the full status bar. We're alive in the video game. We don't need to be resurrected, and we're not dead. We are alive, and we're healthy, and we're thriving. And so when you're going through this journey in life and you have all these things attacking you, pushing you down, you have to ask yourself, maybe you need some awakening. You need to revive that spirit, but then you need to figure out what's going to make me healthy. What's going to keep me alive? What's going to keep me in this game of a life, right? And if we approach life like a game and we approach diet like a game, it can get quite fun. It can get quite playful. It doesn't have to be this drudgery of, I have to worry about my health, because it can certainly seem like that, especially when we're talking about the concept of dieting. From Latin, I can't speak this dialect, but dietetis means of diet or treating through diet, right? And there's other forms of this. Through dieta means course of treatment or way or mode of living prescribed by a physician, or diet regimen. Dieta means a way of life. Daily or day by day. Dietetics or nutritional medicine or treating with diet. To lead one's life, originally separate or select, parliamentary assembly, also a day's work, daily food allowance. And so as you can see through this definition, dieting is a way of life. It doesn't necessarily mean restriction, does it? It doesn't mean you have to have a checklist and, you have to do this for a certain amount of days. It's saying daily, day by day, right? This is something that you're treating through diet. In fact, just that a whole idea within itself, I might not need medication. I might just have to shift some of the foods I'm consuming or the people I'm around and the environment I'm in, and all of a sudden I'm feeling healthier. What's going on here? Well, diet can encompass all of this, not just perhaps food, if we're looking at these definitions. If we're looking at the word apophysis, it's affirmation through negation, knowing what not to do so we know what to do. And perhaps that is very helpful, because when we're looking at the world of dieting and we're first plunging ourselves into, well, should I go on a diet, or what should I do for my health? You're going to be like, man, what do I eat? I feel like I can't eat anything. This person's saying this thing, this person's saying another thing. who do I agree with? I mean, it seems like they both are saying some level of truth, or maybe they're both trying to sell me something and they have an agenda. Here's a picture on the screen. Finally settling down to my vegan, gluten-free, soy-free, antibiotics-free, raw, non-GMO, organic, fat-free, low-carb meal. And what is it? It's just a bunch of ice cubes on a plate. And this is where we've gotten to as a society, guys. We've gotten so paranoid about a lot of our food, partly because, you can say it's big pharma or food industries and all the pesticides and chemicals and food dyes in our food supply, and people are looking around and they're like, man, this is crazy. And so they have to come up with all these different labels of, is this organic? Is it natural? Is it healthy? Is it nutritious? Is it this and that? And after a while, I mean, especially again, someone new to this, it's just like, this is overwhelming. Where do I start? Where do I begin? I'll just eat a bowl of ice cubes. My goodness. So how does ARDA come into this, right? What is the word ARDA? Well, primitive Quintian word, Garda means bounded or defined place, region. Latin ardus or ARDA means dry, acid, parched, poor, shriveled, used dry, dried, water/rainless. And ardalio means busybody or fusser. So I want you to think about our world, right? How busy are we? How hydrated are we? Are we really being used up? Do we feel shriveled in our life? How much of our water is in our food supply, right? Like, think about fruits and vegetables, how much water are in these foods. When we're talking about diets, are we feeling defined, restricted, bounded to a certain region, to a certain idea? And again, this could be seen in a positive light or a negative light. Maybe I'm restricting myself so I know what to eat. Or maybe I'm restricting myself too far where I feel like I don't have any freedom. I'm not having fun and I don't want to do this day to day. This isn't going to be something that's sustainable. And so ARDA is also referred to as the bigger world of Middle Earth. It's named after the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit book trilogy and movie series. And Middle Earth is where all the happenings take place. But Middle Earth is just one piece part of ARDA. So there's this whole world. We only hear about this one world, right, within ARDA. So it's a world inside of a world, a diet of diets, and it's looking at health redefined, trying to see what is this bigger world. Instead of looking at one diet or another diet, can we look at both, looking within and without? Maybe it's totally outside the realm of dieting, and it has to do with you. Can you be defined as a diet? Or are you more complex than any particular diet, and you have to find out what works for you? And I also call ARDA the add diet, right? That can represent, adding in rather than just taking out foods, or it could also represent the fact that we have a lot of ADHD in our world, and we need to get focused. We need to find out, what am I going to eat? Because there's so much going on. So ARDA to me ultimately means restriction from restriction, right? Saying, hey, diets are restrictive, but what if we are dieting the diet? That is recognizing our true diet, understanding who we are, as opposed to just going on some particular diet. Like, this is a journey. Again, it's a different way of looking at this concept of dieting. Here's some quotes talking about this. Life is a journey, and only you hold the map. Life is a journey, not a race. Life is a journey, not a destination. Well, most people, when they go on a diet, it's, I want to do this, I want to reach this, this is my goal. Once I get this, I'm going to go back to the way I was. Or, maybe, okay, this diet is going to be sustainable, but is it a journey for you to get to that point? And isn't it still a journey to find out, well, maybe I can include this food or that food, and why am I having this craving all of a sudden? And why am I having health problems when it originally helped me? Like, maybe a diet worked for you for many months, many years, but you're finding out, I kind of crave something, or something's not right. And, all these conflicts in the world and the research coming out and people having cancer, it's like, maybe there's something more to this that's missing, right? But of course, if somebody's trying to sell you something online and they have a whole career made off of it, then they're not going to want you to see that outside world like you see on the slide. They don't want you to open the door and see this open world of freedom that has so much potential, so much possibility, and it's fearful, right? It's not easy to put into a book. It's not easy to sell. And so here's more quotes. We're going on an adventure. That's a classic, right from The Hobbit itself. The world is not in your books and maps. It's out there, right? So all these diet books, it's literally $1 billion industry. Not all those who wander are lost. These are quotes, by the way, from The Lord of the Rings. You step into the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there is no knowing where you might be swept off to. There's so many people. They want you to go on their diet protocol. I'm not trying to do that here. I'm trying to share with you who you are. And we're going to talk more about that and what that means. J.R.R. Tolkien says, the road goes ever on and on. They were at the end of their journey, but as far as ever, it seemed, from the end of their quest. So it's just a never-ending, like, I want to improve myself. I want to become healthier and healthier. You're never at a point where you're like, I am healthy. You just have to be healthy enough to feel content, right? To feel happy. And I think that people can get there, absolutely, but they can't necessarily expect it to happen easily or happen within 30 days. Now, again, for some people it might, but it depends. And having those dependencies, again, is not a very easy thing to put in some book and to say, this is the map and this is how everybody should do it. Here's another quote from Gandalf. Some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that is not what I have found. It is the small, everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love. Why Bilbo Baggins? Perhaps because I am afraid and he gives me courage, right? So Gandalf is this old, wise guy. But yeah, he's looking down to some hobbit, the one who's going to save all of Middle-earth, all of the Lord of the Rings. And why him? Why him of all people? Well, in my seminar, I talk about how the hobbits are the freest of all the other people. And we're talking about freedom under natural law. You know, freedom has a lot to do with health. If we have a disease taking over our body, man, you know, this is going to take over our entire life and we're going to have no choice but to focus on it. But those small acts and those everyday habits that we start forming can really make a big difference in the long run. And maybe it's that lack of nature, the lack of social community connection that is actually the reason why we are not healthy as a society at large. It may not even be a particular dietary fix or a particular, thing that everybody has to go on. Right? It could be these really small, powerful things that are right in front of our faces that we ignore or that we look past. And in reality, guys, we got to go on an adventure. We got to do this. Here's a bunch of studies on health being a journey and exploration with addition rather than elimination. And if you notice, there's plenty of studies talking about how dietary restraint does not help people, how restrictive dieting is just causing all sorts of different problems, more problems than solutions. And it's always an interesting thing to me when I observe the world and I look around me and I'm like, man, we have all these systems created to help us, and meanwhile, they seem to be causing more harm than good sometimes. Now, why is that, right? Is there corrupt research? Is there deception involved? Well, maybe it has to do with personal responsibility. It has to do with taking life into our own hands because it's only our own lives, right? This is the true home we live in, our body. We might live in these like concrete, boxed homes, but for hundreds of thousands of years, we were living out in nature, staring into the campfire. And you got to think about what that does to an individual, or even the fact that we've had thousands of years of war and trauma and conflict. And people are like, man, my genes, I'm just destined by whatever the genetics tell me. But then you look into epigenetics and genetic expression, and you're not just predetermined fate where you have no control over your own health. This is a journey. And if you look at it like a journey, you will start to treat it as one. And I want you to do that, especially while watching this seminar here. Here's more studies on this, and you can pause at any moment and read these for yourself or do extra research and confirm these different studies. I actually just got them from, using various sources on AI, because now we have that, which can actually benefit us quite a bit. We'll talk about that as well. But we have to understand a very key concept called bio-individuality, right? So bio-individuality is the foundational principle in integrative nutrition, okay? It's recognizing that each person possesses a unique physiological blueprint determined by genetics, metabolic function, gut microbiome composition, environmental exposures, and stress history that fundamentally shapes their nutritional requirements and responses to dietary interventions. This concept asserts that no universal dietary protocol exists. What optimizes health for one individual may prove ineffective or harmful for another, even when consuming identical foods or supplements. In an era where technological capability enables the production and marketing of virtually any nutritional product, bio-individuality demands critical discernment. Marketplace availability and anecdotal success stories provide no predictive validity for individual outcomes. Rather, each person must become their own primary investigator, using rigorous self-observation and personalized assessment to determine what truly serves their unique biological needs, rather than defaulting to popular trends, testimonials, or one-size-fits-all recommendations divorced from individual psychological or physiological context. Again, psychosomatics, I mean, this is a field even the DSM and psychology doesn't really talk much about. There is often so many aspects to one person's health that to generalize and say it's all dietary or it's all psychological or it's all this or that, we have to be very careful when we're saying this applies to everybody, because we find out there's many different seasons, there's many different cultures, there's many different environmental toxins, there's new chemicals being introduced into our world all the time. There's even biotech and nanotechnology that people are worried and talking about. We're talking about a whole new realm of health, my friends, that extends beyond just diet. But even just looking at diet alone, you'll see how much variety there is and how important it is, frankly, that we look at the individual. And here's a bunch of studies talking about health through bio-individuality rather than diet, and how people had better results when they were looking at their own health as opposed to someone saying, this is what your health is supposed to be. This is the diet you're supposed to go on. Crazy stuff, because again, you live in a world where people want you to buy things, and hey, they may truly believe in it, it may have worked for them, but will it work for you? That's the question you must always ask yourself. So how do we, juxtapose this idea of bio-individuality? What is the opposition to that? I call it dietism, right? Basically, the word diet with the word ism, let's be honest, is the dogmatic belief system that conditioned individuals to accept restrictive eating protocols as necessary, morally superior, and universally applicable, despite evidence that all standardized diets contradict human bio-individuality and often produce harmful psychological and metabolic consequences. And so here's the justification involved in dietism. It's the myth that one specific dietary protocol, whether it's keto, paleo, vegan, carnivore, intermittent fasting, etc., represents the singular correct way to eat, with all deviations framed as moral or health failures. There's also abstraction, the erasure of individual biological variation, treating all humans as identical metabolic units rather than recognizing their genetic, microbiomic, and phenotypic uniqueness documented in nutrigenomics and personalized nutrition research. And denial. I got to drink water here too. My goodness, right? Got to pay attention to my own health while I'm presenting this. Denial, right? Because it's like, man, I'm focused on this and I shouldn't pay attention to what's going on. The systemic invisibility of dieting's documented harms: orthorexia, eating disorder proliferation, psychological distress, metabolic dysfunction, social alienation through narratives of wellness and health optimization, right? This is what is best. This is what our ancestors have always done. This is what's moral and necessary for all of humankind. Again, what this does is it takes you away from looking at your own individual health, how you personally are responding to these foods. Are you going to listen, or are you going to just ignore and deny, right? So then there's also domination, the assertion of external authority, whether it's celebrity influencers, diet corporations, wellness industries, even medical establishments, over individual bodily autonomy and innate hunger/society signals, creating dependency on external dietary prescriptions rather than cultivating interoceptive awareness. And, I'm going through this. I'm trying to go as fast as possible to really, nail this to you, because I don't want to stress this, that long, and I don't want to sell you anything. I want to just be real and honest. I want to get right to the tips that I think can help you, that can apply to everybody. And then the ones that you have to look at and say, well, what is going to work for me? Right? Because there's things that we might say, yeah, this applies to everyone. Like, you're a human being, I'm a human being, and we might have a specific type of bodily blueprint or anatomy. But that being said, then there's those different types of foods, and then there's those genetics and the metabolic systems that we have to look at, right? And so we're going to talk about that. But unlike carnism, which a lot of people talk about when it comes to veganism, which is anybody who eats meat, which privileges one food category, dietism is universally oppressive because it simultaneously demonizes contradictory dietary approaches, ensuring that regardless of which diet a person chooses, they are participating in an ideological system that denies their bio-individuality. If you know anything about my work, I talk a lot about ideologies and attachments, and that very problem within itself is observed in a lot of Eastern philosophy, like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. The attachment to this particular way of doing things, right? So here's the cruel paradox. Following any diet reinforces the belief that diets are necessary, while the scientific evidence can demonstrate that personalized, non-restrictive eating aligned with individual biology produces superior health outcomes compared to standardized protocols. So there's an economic harm because there's a $70+ billion diet industry which profits directly from perpetrating the myth that individual bodies are broken without external dietary intervention. There's psychological harm, cultivating shame, moral judgment, and disordered relationships with food that persist regardless of diet success. And then there's epistemic suppression, rendering invisible the scientific consensus that bio-individuality, not dietary dogma, determines nutritional outcomes, thereby preventing people from trusting themselves. It's just like when we tell someone, well, you got to follow orders, you got to do what the government tells you, what the law says. Well, are we to ignore morality? Isn't the law to represent morality? Like, isn't morality the most important thing at the end of the day? And finding out, like, this is our conscience, the very idea of a conscience would just be not really that important if you're saying one should always follow orders and do what they're told. I'm saying you should always, listen to your conscience, always listen to your body, always trust yourself. But you do have to question yourself, right? Just as much as you have to question the people who are telling you what to do. You have to do both. But again, that's like a nuance that the dieting industries and the governments don't want you to have. They want you to either be obedient or to follow a diet because it benefits them. But it doesn't benefit you. It benefits you to think for yourself above all things, because you have that ability. It's within you. And so I represent this idea of dietism as mere harm by diet as itself. Anytime people are harmed by diet, I say it is dietism at work, because they didn't listen to their body, or they were unable to see outside of that diet. So they feel like a victim, and they become a victim to that diet. They disempower themselves, right? Dietary classification, just the very idea of labeling yourself, saying, I am on a vegan diet, I'm on a keto diet, carnist, vegan, paleo, any identity creates the same harm that psychiatrist Thomas Saz critiqued in Psychiatric Diagnosis. It transforms flexible, context-dependent eating behaviors into rigid identity markers that restrict freedom and prevent learning. Unwanted labels generate resistance to treatment and change, narrow the inquiry into root causes, and foster victim-hero dynamics where providers maintain authority over broken eaters rather than cultivating autonomy. So this has everything to do with freedom, again. And this is just talking about how we label, how we go about, with the food that we eat. Not even talking about how disease is restricting our freedom. Research confirms that over-identification with dietary labels correlates with increased embitterment, eating disorders, and reduced psychological flexibility, while monetary incentives, the $70+ billion diet industry, disability accommodations, wellness income streams encourage dishonesty and perpetrate dependence on external dietary prescriptions rather than bio-individual wisdom. When you're put into a box, you're easy to figure out and you're easy to attack. These are the people who have this ideology, these are the people that have this ideology, and I am this. And so it's becoming an us versus them. We're no longer looking at them and looking at the uniqueness or looking at ourselves and looking deeper and looking to nuance. No, we say, I am a vegan, I am a carnivore, rather than I currently eat this way for these reasons. The classification becomes a prison. Any impulse to eat differently registers as moral failure or identity crisis rather than biological intelligence responding to changing needs, eliminating the contextual adaptation that characterizes metabolically healthy humans practicing true bio-individuality across time. So dietism is a pseudo-identity. You are not a vegan, you are not keto, you are not carnivore or a lion or whatever. These are things that are used for marketing. Frankly, that's just marketing conditioning, if I'm going to be honest with you. And it also goes by another term, yo-yo dieting. Right? You feel motivated, you start a new diet, you feel good, you're staying consistent, everybody's feeding your ego because probably your whole algorithm talks about that diet and you're doing all this research about it and you're like, wow, this sounds amazing. Look at all these people with all these great results. And then you start to feel tired and restricted and you're losing motivation. And then you give up on this unsustainable diet and lifestyle and you're back to number one again as you try to find out, oh, well, what's the next diet? What's the next thing I got to do? And it's not a bad thing necessarily that you're on this cycle, but you have to recognize that it's a journey and that you're always trying to improve. You don't want to end up with the same results where you are basically, losing the weight and then gaining it back, and then you're losing the weight and then you're gaining it back. And it just seems like this never-ending storm that is never really, stable per se, in a state of homeostasis as it would be in the body. And so slow and steady weight loss is the only way to avoid yo-yo dieting, where you lose a lot of weight quickly only to regain it back. It's not sustainable. You can see a chart on the right-hand screen. Not a lot of people talk about this when it comes to dieting because, again, it goes against what they're trying to sell you. Here's a bunch of studies on the problems of dieting overall. And here's a chart comparing bioindividuality with dieting, right? So bioindividuality, each person is unique, it's personalized, it's what works for you, there's a journey, you're learning, and it overall encourages consciousness. I like to call it conscious dieting, right? It's creative, it's integrative, it's human, right? We're not looking at someone like a number line, like, oh, this is the ideology, this is the way it's got to be. Dietism, it's all about compliance. You have to meet these standards. It's rigid, it's predetermined, it's what works for others, right? Meal plans, calorie counting, scientism, ultimately, if you look this up, a left brain imbalance, masculine imbalance. It's a one-size-fits-all approach. It's all the different identities, keto, paleo, vegan, vegetarian, etc., right? And you'll notice I have really fitting pictures here, like Frodo looking at the ring. He's the one who can take this ring and destroy it. He's a unique individual. He recognizes his own power, and people had to show him this in a way. He had to see it for himself, and then once he saw it for himself, he had to protect himself against all these other people who were trying to take that ring from him, trying to be like him. And it's you see the struggle in the movies of his unique character clashing against all these other unique characters, but also how in the Fellowship of the Ring and Lord of the Rings, there needs to be a bunch of different people all partaking in their own roles to help one another. It's actually more helpful that you partake in what works for you and I partake in what helps for me, rather than I find out what works for you. Because then I can speak honestly and I'm not projecting. I'm not saying this is what you have to do because it works for me. I'm just being honest and saying, well, this is what works for me, but it may not work for you. Again, it's human. And if you look at this chart here, this is from Integrative Nutrition. This is known as the circle of life. You can actually do this as an exercise if you want to pause this presentation and ask yourself on each one of these categories, maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, you can also draw a circle, right? And the more complete of a circle it is, the more whole it is, the more fulfilled you are, or the higher the number is, right? So what is your creativity on a scale of 0 to 10? Do you feel very creative? What about finances? What about career, education, health, physical activity? See, life is in your hands, and if you notice, this goes way beyond diet, way beyond food. I would argue that these things impact people more than food, more than diet. And perhaps this is what I'm talking about when it comes to ARDA, because it's a journey that extends beyond diet. Okay, so let's talk about natural law bioindividuality, since we're talking about freedom under natural law. That's the conference I am delivering this presentation for. You may have never heard of natural law. Well, you likely have if you are watching this conference and you're familiar with other speakers and their works. But natural law has to do with morality, it has to do with behavior and what are we to do in our lives, right? So people ask themselves, well, how does that apply to diet? And do I want to harm other animals, for example? Here's a great work, a favorite of mine, talking about natural law from C.F. Volney. Under the section temperance, right? Temperance is usually also associated with the tarot card justice. And there's a question here. It says, does the law of nature forbid the use of certain kinds of meat or of certain vegetables on particular days during certain seasons? And he says, no, it absolutely forbids only whatever is injurious to health. Its precepts in this respect vary according to persons and even constitute a very delicate and important science, for the quality, the quantity, and the combination of ailments have the greatest influence not only over the momentary affections of the soul, but even over its habitual disposition. Not a very easy answer, is it? Not something you can easily sell, is it? He says the dietetic science constituted a considerable part of morality. So here we start to notice that there is a link between morality and health, and that can't be ignored. And perhaps we can't just say that is forbidding meat or forbidding plants or forbidding a particular food. Maybe it's a bit more complicated than that. I mean, as you see, there's a lot of conflict when it comes to people who teach the subject of natural law and talk about morality, and then they start to bring animals into the equation. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? You don't have to agree with me. You can think for yourself on all of this, but here are the main two disclaimers I have on behalf of the ARDA diet based on what I just said. 1. ARDA is a framework against all diets, all dietism. However, it studies from them all to help an individual attain their own personalized diet, bioindividuality. Many factors compound onto an individual life decision of any kind. Learning never stops, and change is a constant. We can say change is natural law itself. And so with that understanding, that's very important when it comes to morality and it comes to our own decisions in our own life. Because number 2, ARDA does not ignore morality, nor does it ignore health. Both are considered, and one does not take precedence over the other. I consider them to be allied. Just as it is to say the law of freedom by Mark Passio states that morality and freedom are directly proportional, this law, what I'm going to call the law of nutriment, which means to grow or to flow, portrays the relationship, an environment-based law of interdependence and reciprocity, which natural law is also considered the golden rule and consequentialism and all these different terms that represent reciprocity. Some in history have called it the law of reason. And if we're getting disease from eating a particular way that we're being told is moral, then maybe there's more to it, right? Unless you are healthy, this is what the law of nutriment is. Unless you are healthy, you cannot truly be moral. And unless you are moral, you cannot truly be healthy. Unless you nurture nature, nature cannot nurture you. And unless nature nurtures you, you cannot nurture nature. Right? So you have to care for nature. You have to care for your body. Then it will care for you. It's the same way when you're growing plants, when you're caring for animals. If you want them to be healthy, you're going to be healthy toward them. You're going to make sure that they're raised in the right environment and the plants are supported by the environment. And that's going to, in response, support you. And it's just a never-ending cycle of reciprocity. To say that morality is most important and disregard all these people who have these experiences where they're getting hurt is a mistake, in my view. Every person, every plant, every nutrient, it should all be taken into account. Health and morality, both of these relate to empathy, consciousness, trauma, and presence. And I think that only further proves that this law of equilibrium between health and morality should be considered. There's a lot of people out there who are eating meat, who are eating all sorts of foods, and they don't care about how an animal is raised, or they don't care about how the plant was raised. And they're both equally important. They both determine so much, for future harvest, for your fertility, for your health down the road. And I say, again, this is something that diets don't always look at, because diets are looking at the type of food. They're not looking at how the food is raised or how it's made necessarily. You can see many organic foods that are actually contaminated with heavy metals. They don't care about that. Organic doesn't really look at that. And plus, there's a bunch of organic pesticides and organic herbicides and stuff that they can use. And a lot of organic brands are owned by the very same companies that produce non-organic foods. And sometimes different regulations in different countries can mix things up, and it's not actually organic. You have a lot of issues here, and that only calls for more individual responsibility, more individual consciousness. But if you label something, you say, well, this is keto, this is carnivore, this is vegan, therefore it's healthy, it totally takes out that journey. It takes out that creativity and that learning process, which helps us actually attain our health. Again, empathy, consciousness, trauma, and presence, the very things that affect our health the most. Just by becoming more conscious of what we're consuming, we, in response, are becoming healthier. And so you can see, here's a bunch of studies, and from an AI analysis of numerous studies, including these, it says the research does not support the claim that either ketogenic or vegan diets inherently enhance moral capacity. Ketogenic diets show cognitive benefits. Vegan diets can carry some orthorexia risk and some nutrient deficiency, and they both have their own benefits in different places. But balanced bio-individuality, optimized diets consistently demonstrate superior cognitive and mental health outcomes. The neurobiological biological basis required for moral agency, empathy, impulse control, and ethical decision making. It's all going to be determined through this journey. Through saying, hey, I'm going to be responsible over my own health. I'm not just going to give it away to some health authority or some political authority. Oh, they just released a new food pyramid, and oh, the USDA food plate, therefore it's healthy. This is how I should eat. It's like, really? Are you sure about that? So as you can see here, I'm talking a lot about creativity. I'm talking a lot about, making this a journey and something that you want to partake in. Life must be lived as play, Plato said. He also said you can discover more about a person in an hour of play than a year of conversation. Imagine that. Imagine if a practitioner were to play with their patient rather than talk to them and say, what's your problems today? Oh, okay. How's your family? And it's like good if a practitioner can connect with the patient, because practitioners may not always do that, but is the patient actually having fun in their life? Are they enjoying their life? Is health to them something that is drudgery, or is it something that is fun? Creativity itself is a biological necessity for human health. Engaging in creative expression activates multiple brain regions, reducing stress hormones while elevating mood-enhancing neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. Through art, music, writing, or innovative problem-solving, creativity rewires neural pathways, strengthens neuroplasticity, and fosters emotional resilience. The journey of creativity is ultimately the journey toward wholeness and vitality. Look at all the symbols we create, and look at just the Lord of the Rings itself, a very creative work. You can imagine how many people they've actually gotten some benefit out of their own life just from watching these movies, and how it makes them feel getting out of the movie theater. And I think it invokes a certain emotion which we cannot ignore. We've had all these plays and movies and TV shows for many, many decades in humanity's time, and this plays a toll on their psychosomatic health, on how they perceive the world around them and how they perceive themselves. Notice all these studies talking about how creativity, imagination, play, fantasy actually helps their health. So when I'm talking about ARDA and I'm talking about Lord of the Rings, there's actually great reason to apply that to our own individual health. And again, creativity doesn't want to be put into a box. It's the nature of play that it is not told what to do, not told this is what health is. And so ARDA, again, I said it's conscious, creative, integrative, and individualized. So what does that mean? Well, conscious, consciere, the same actual roots of conscience, which is knowing what is right versus what is wrong, means with knowledge, with knowing. And then creative means to bring into being. So going back to the word awakening, right? Sparking that light in people's eyes, seeing that youth, that innocence, that vibratory energy, that vitality. That's what we want to see when we're truly healthy, right? We want to grow in this world. We don't want to decay and man, I'm not growing anymore. My brain is no longer sharp. I have cancer and all this stuff. No, you're much more than that. Integrative, whole. You're in touch with the whole of creation itself. That's why you too are integrative and you're whole and you're healthy. It's individualized because you are one whole in the whole of the universe, right? Symbolically, I have this within the ring, right? This ring. What are you attached to? What are you binding your life to? Are you going to bind your life to principles like this that are universal, that apply to everyone, that help you expand, that help you reach new destinations, help you have fun? Or are you going to have something that restricts you, that make you feel, I don't want to do this anymore, right? So we can juxtapose now our two main principles in ARDA, which is life versus death, or life versus evil, right? If you look at the word evil, it's just the inverse of live, L-I-V-E. And so life involves morality, principality, conscious expression, and critical thinking. And that includes in our food choices. Whereas evil is the lack of life, lack of empathy, lack of vitality, and actions that promote denaturing or dehumanization. And that includes, again, in food choices. So everything I say in the life is really just the opposite in evil, right? So life includes foods from nature and tend to be non-man-made or unchanged by humans. We need more pure, intended water, right? Spring-sourced water is best, hydrogen water and high-quality filtered water. These are researched options. You can look it up for yourself. Now, what life is essentially here in ARDA is just the basic rules of diet, right? That most people can agree with. They're basically like, no processed food, nothing bad, nothing unnatural. That's what life is, care, love, social relationships, all the things we talked about before. It's just the universal things that we can all agree on. That's what life is. Evil is just the opposite of that, basically, right? So life is more high-quality vegetables, especially cruciferous, leafy, and dark greens. A lot of people talk about that. Healthy fats such as nuts, seeds, olive oil, avocado, wild-caught, often smaller fish, legumes, spices, herbs, local homegrown produce, homemade foods, no artificial ingredients. And again, this is going to differ person to person, and you may say, well, I don't eat this, maybe I have an allergy to this or that. But as a general principle, this is what life is as opposed to evil. Right? Natural nutrient density, high quality berries, fruits, raw foods, antioxidants, and, even perhaps supplementing with multivitamins, fish oil, probiotics, and adaptogens for additional support. Evil is processed foods and drinks with additives or ingredients not present in nature. There's also excessive amounts of maybe good things, right? Like if you have too much water, it can kill you, right? It's like knowing balance, it's knowing harmony. It's listening, again, to your body to know that, because hey, water is vegan and water is keto and water is carnivore. It doesn't mean that it's healthy for you or in the right dosage you're consuming, or that it isn't contaminated. There's so many different things just on water alone. Right? And so low quality, excessive meat consumption, excessive and poor quality dairy consumption, excessive and low quality coffee or stimulant use, over-reliance on technology, drugs, and artificial or man-made laws, right? Oh, well, the law will make me healthy, and Medicare and Medicaid and my doctor will make me healthy. Excessive and poor quality grain consumption. Many people are talking about avoid the whites and the pastas and all these processed, refined carbohydrates, as they say. That is what evil is as opposed to life. This is a very important slide because this helps us get a general framework of what do we have in our life more of and what do we get rid of? What is less? And you don't have to look at evil here. You can add more of life and the evil should start to go away on its own. But I think it's important to recognize both of these, and evil often takes the form through the SAD diet. I don't know if it's a coincidence it's called that, but the standard American diet, that's what it represents, which is linked to poor mental and physical health outcomes. There's a reason why so many people in America are talking about health and trying to make things better, but it's also a capitalist nation, a money-based nation where they're trying to sell you a bunch of things, and maybe that's part of the reason why people aren't so healthy. Here is a bunch of studies on general integrative nutrition dietary tips. So all the things I mentioned, basically, all the things of life versus all the things of evil. There's plenty of studies on this material. And so now we come to the very fun part of the seminar, because we talked about general principles and what is ARDA and what is a diet, but this is the core part of this seminar. I want you to follow along here and choose your stats, right? So you're entering this world of ARDA, you're creating your character, you're on this journey. You have to make decisions for yourself. And I'm just here as a guide along with you on the side. That's why I'm actually an integrative nutrition health coach. I'm just a coach. I'm just here to say, you got this, keep going, don't give up, don't get stuck, don't think you've gotten it all figured out. There's a lot of people who are going to watch this seminar who are going to think they figured it all out, who think they know what is healthy. And I will say right now, I'm not the most healthy. Nobody is in perfect health. We're all doing something wrong. I'm sitting in this room right now, and there's a bunch of things that are probably affecting me, right? I have a plant on my desk, which is good, and I have night light on with my computer, and of course I have red light glasses and a bunch of stuff like that. But this is the type of compensation, the type of listening we need to have for ourselves in our own environment. So let us begin. We have to start with our faction. I used this picture in the background from World of Warcraft, because World of Warcraft, you can say, is in part inspired by Lord of the Rings. You have to choose, are you going to stand for evil or for good? You have to make this willful decision for yourself, right? With a country, with a neighborhood, with a community. What people do you surround yourself with? What culture? What ideas? Where do you stand on health when it comes to what is right and what is wrong? What would be examples? How do you want to live? Where does health fit in? What are your health goals? Is it in alignment or not with others? I'm going to be asking you a lot of questions here because I want you to decide for yourself where you are with your health. All right, so an example of your faction is a statement like this. My faction includes proud representation of Texas, and within a close-knit family who seeks out people who are kind and places where it is peaceful. We believe smoking in particular, as affecting our own family's past, is bad in all forms. We are strong believers in always following your conscience. Believe life, and especially younger generations, must be protected. We want to live free from disease, poverty, addictions, and bad behaviors. What this is, it's like a form of mantra or affirmation, which a lot of people do for their health within itself. And what it does also is it says, here are my goals. This is what I want to live my life by. Because you're going to go on this journey, and this faction might change. You might, these things might change slightly, but you generally have an intent. You have an idea of like, I want to be comforted in life. I want to have a stable future. I want to have a good life. I want to be healthy. That's the whole reason why you're watching this. So I want you to just explore, what does that mean for you? Do you stand with evil? Do you stand for good? Can you expand on that a little bit? This is the allegiance that you have to your goal. And here's a bunch of studies on intention, connection, and declaration and commitment to health. Having this intention is a very important part before we go into any journey at all. And now, here's a very interesting one. Here's a scene from The Lord of the Rings. Try it, just a mouthful. I don't like green food. Where's the meat? Says the dwarf. And these dwarves are actually eating dinner at the elves in Rivendell, at their little kingdom, their little city. And they're like, where's the meat, right? Because they're used to meat, but the elves are not used to meat. And so we have to pick our race. Again, think of this like a video game. This is all figurative fantasy on purpose. This is your common food. Where do you stand? Because right now, as I see it, and this is again based on my own visions of what I've seen looking through the health world, you have many people who are pushing the paleo, carnivore, keto side of things versus people who are pushing the vegetarian/vegan side of things. So let's map this out according to Lord of the Rings. We have the dwarves, who are these meat-based, masculine, brothers in arms. This is healthy fats, right? Mainly. And then we have the elves. They're just as strong, but they're more on the feminine side. They care for the plant world and vegetables and fruits. You can look at this like yin and yang as well. And you might be kind of like, what's going on here? Is this really true? Well, no. Look at the middle. It says human, right? If you're a human, you're kind of a mix of the two, or you're trying to find out, because we're omnivores. We've eaten both. And you could say, well, we have certain teeth that are maybe meant for meat, right? Like these, and then some that are meant for plants, like the ones back of our teeth, molars. And there's people who debate about our physiology all the time and are we supposed to eat this or eat that? But clearly we've evolved and we've eaten both of these materials, and people have healed from both of these materials. And how is that possible? Is it just propaganda that people are healing from one side or the other? Or is it actually true? Well, the people I've talked to, I hear all sorts of different stories. But one thing I hear in common is that life supports life and that evil supports evil. Right? So if we're a human and we don't know where we are going, but we are somewhere in the midst of this, we have to map out where we belong. So here's a better chart where we put in life and evil. If we're going down, we're more in this unknown confusion, we're heading toward evil, right? So there's no care, there's no true feeding, we're confused, we're restricted. This is dietism, right? But if we understand more of who we are, a hobbit is seen more like a human, more in touch with nature. This is why the hobbits are celebrated in the Lord of the Rings. They're the only ones who can destroy the ring, and humans are actually corruptible. In fact, humans are always having all these problems within their kingdoms. The hobbits live in the free Shire. They're the freest people on earth, right? And they live more in harmony with nature. They live under the hill. Incredible stuff. And it's not to say the dwarves don't either, or the elves don't either, but the hobbits, they're a unique character, and they represent a human that is more in touch with life, right? So we're not confused and we're not restricted either. We're not confused or restricted. We can do both. And there's care. There's truly feeding our soul and what we need. And to expand on this further, a human can be corrupted into an orc, right? And the main evil force behind evil is Melkor, which actually translates to king, directly to king, right? We don't want kings or people who are in charge of our own life, our own health. We want to be in charge of our own health and our own life. But that might mean looking up to something higher, to God, to the one, to natural law, to truth, right? We're looking up figuratively. We're not just looking down like, oh, there's nothing I can do. There's nowhere I'm going. I'm not making any progress. It's death. It's depression. It's insecurity. It's denature. It's hell. That's basically what it is. Instead, we're looking up. Nature, fulfillment, enlightenment, faith, hope, heaven, morality. That's what it does for us. It opens, it expands. It's toward Middle Earth, right? We're toward recognizing where we are, where everything takes place. Instead, you can go toward the dark lands and live with Mordor, and everything is death and destruction. Look at what it looks like in the movies. You don't see any plant life. You don't see any life in general. Everybody's just a slave. They're just doing what they're told. That's not how we're supposed to live our lives. We're supposed to be free and happy and joyous, like the hobbits. They're always partying. So how do you keep up with the shift? And how do you make sure you're not tempted by evil? What I want you to do, because this is a Y and X axis, right? So that means the Y-axis, which is life and evil, right? This is your mentality and your quality. The X-axis is your physicality and quantity. I want you to map out where you currently are with your health. Maybe you eat more plants, so you're going to be on the right side of this chart. If you eat more meat or healthy fats, you're going to be on the left side of this chart. And by the way, you can do a keto vegan diet. That does exist, doing plant-based fats. So wherever you fit on this chart, put yourself there, okay? Maybe you fast a lot. That's very interesting, right? Where would you put yourself according to the way you see things? And also, Mark Passio, someone who talks about natural law, talks about how the right brain is usually associated more with the Eastern Hemisphere of the world. The Western Hemisphere of the world is associated more with the left brain. And so I mapped that out again, where the left brain, the Western, is more the Dorvan. People in America, people in the consumer-based countries, they're consuming a lot more meat than the people in the East who are utilizing a lot more plants, and they're doing yoga and more of these Eastern modalities. I think this is a very fitting chart. I know it's going to be controversial for some people, but I think it applies very well to our current world. So what race are you? Are you a dwarf? Are you an elf? Are you a human/hobbit? Where do you fit in? Here are benefits of paleo, keto, carnivore, vegetarian, and vegan diets. Notice you can find studies on any one of these. Okay, there's going to be people who say this one's better than the other ones. But if you want to find a study out there, you're going to find it. Because again, that's what dietism is. That's what scientism is. I've got to find something. Oh, I have AI now. I can find anything I want. I'm here, so it does exist, here's studies, but I want you to find out what works for you, which kind of throws all these studies out the window, doesn't it? At the end of the day, though, it is interesting to see your options and see what you can eat. Because again, you limit your options and you say, this is the only diet. And so then you never experiment and you never go on that journey. And I've made so many charts that are so complicated talking about this, the quality qualifier and the ARDA wheel, the ARDA food circle, the very complex, charts talking about where you're at. This one has everything in it, the bodily world of ARDA. Again, I don't recommend these for people. These are very complicated, detailed charts, just like the book. That's why you're watching this seminar right now, the transition wheel, how you go from one step to the other. Crazy stuff. Anyways, next step. Okay, so we got our faction, we got our